everyone. I'm Leanne West, and I'm the president of the International Children's Advisory Network. And I want to welcome you today to Ask the Experts, where sometimes the experts are clinicians and sometimes the experts are our youth members.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this month's Ask the Experts, which we have every month that iCAN hosts, and we usually hit on different topics like ethics, understanding clinical research, all sorts of different things where any kids, adults who come on in can get their questions answered on the topics. And we have a very special guest today, Paula Garcia Todd from DuPont, who has given us this wonderful opportunity to do this interactive activity with us. So Paula, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thanks so much for having me. So maybe I'll just start off before I share my slides. I would love if you could please type into the chat room your age and where you're located. And that just helps me understand where we're starting from here, because we're going to be talking about some chemistry. And I just want to make sure everyone's kind of comfortable and I just want to level set with everyone. So I'm just curious if you could type your age and where you're located. That would be great. Melanie, you do not need to type your age. You're okay. Awesome. All right, Michigan. I lived in Midland for 8 years. Yes, I worked at Dow Chemical for a long time.
I have some good family friends who've worked at Dow.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, Michigan summers cannot be beat. I mean, they are fantastic. Michigan winters, however, that's a different story.
Absolutely.
All right, good. Yeah, 16 Chicago, New Jersey, Boston, Minneapolis. Wow. Okay. All right. Okay, good. All right. So this helps me level set because I thought we might have some younger kids in here. So this is a good starting point. So now I feel a little bit better about the slides I'd put together, because we're going to go into some pretty deep topics here. So let me pull up my slides and then we'll get started. Okay. All right. So let's get started. So today we're going to talk about what's in a pill. My name is Paula Garcia Todd. I was working at DuPont. My business unit at DuPont just got purchased by another company. So as of February, I work for another company called International Flavors and Fragrances. And what you can learn from that is that this is the corporate world. You never know who you work for how long, because a lot of mergers and acquisitions just naturally happen in the industry. But my job is still exactly the same. I'm still working within the pharmaceutical field where I've worked for the past 18 years. So a little bit about me. My background is actually in chemical engineering. I have a bachelor's and a master's in chemical engineering. I went to Penn State for school. I'm originally from Brazil. We moved to the US when I was 9, and I did not speak any English. So kids, anything's possible, I promise. We were living outside of Pittsburgh at the time that I graduated high school. And that's why I chose Penn State for engineering school. I had a wonderful experience there. I actually started doing undergraduate research my sophomore year, my second year in college, which proved to be really, really helpful because I quickly learned that I really enjoyed research. And I got really into it. And so by the time I hit my senior year, my advisor pulled me aside and said, listen, you've got enough research to write a master's thesis. So if you stay an extra year, take the classes, finish your research, write the thesis and defend it, you could graduate with a bachelor's and a master's in 5 years. It sounded really easy on paper. I'm going to tell you, it was really, really hard, but totally, totally worth it. It was a great experience. I have worked in pharmaceuticals my whole career because that's really what I'm passionate about. When I was little, I really thought that maybe I would become a doctor, but I can readily, openly admit that I faint at the sight of blood. So medicine was never in the cards for me. So my next best alternative was pharmaceuticals. And that's where I have spent my career doing various types of roles. So I actually started off in manufacturing. What I have there is a picture of a chemical plant. Most people think of factories and plants as being kind of like scary and dirty. And the reality is everything around us is made in chemical plants. And as a chemical engineer, your job is to scale up chemical processes into these plant settings so we can mass produce materials for everybody who needs them. And so I had a typical chemical engineering job, climbing up and down those distillation columns that you see. Love that job. But then because of that experience that I had in college, I realized I wanted to go back into research. So I went back into the lab, and there you see a picture of what a lab setting typically looks like. I worked there for a long time. And then I went into what we call technical service, because I got a really deep understanding of these products that I'm going to talk about today. They put me in a role where I basically traveled the world for 5 years, visiting pharmaceutical companies to solve their formulation challenges. I probably learned the most in that role because it's usually through problems that you learn the most. When things go smoothly, things are fine. But when you run into problems, that's where your learning curve really takes off. And so now I live in Atlanta. I have 3 kids. They're 12, 11, and 5. I am currently in a marketing role. What? What is that? Now you're in business? What are you talking about? So that is the real beauty of a STEM background, which I love to share, is that having that strong technical foundation really allows you to move your career in a lot of different ways. And if you had asked me when I was in college, do you see yourself in a business role? I would have said, absolutely not. I love engineering. I love solving technical problems. But sure enough, about 8 years ago, I started doing marketing. I've had various types of product management, commercial, technical sales types roles. And now I'm a global strategic marketing manager for our business, which also shows you that, again, with that solid background, a lot of different ways you can take your career. It will not be stagnant in any way. Okay, so it sounds like based on, unless more people popped in, originally, I had considered doing a little bit of a background on chemistry because I thought we would have some elementary kids on here. Is that, Claire, is that still the case? Like we're still good, mostly older kids, or has anyone else popped in?
No, you are good to go.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to skip through this because I'm hoping that most of you have a good sense of chemistry. And I'm hoping most of you have a good sense of what molecules are, right? Molecules made up of atoms, right? Because what we're going to do is we're going to do some chemistry together today. I will review this slide with all of you, though. What can a chemist do? So chemists play with molecules. And I like to think of molecules as being little Lego building sets. These are the things that build everything around us, right? Everything you touch, the table, your clothes, your body, the air around us, there's chemistry everywhere and in everything that we do. And so chemists are really needed everywhere. And chemists can work in pharmaceutical fields, developing new medicines, similar to what I do, which we're going to talk about in more detail here today. They can work as toxicologists to understand the safety of products and food and everything around us. They can work in environmental science to help protect our earth. Chemistry is needed to gauge the purity of our water systems, soil systems, everything to check and gauge on how things look environmentally around us. Chemists can work in forensics. This is usually, especially with younger kids, I get a lot of questions around helping to solve detective cases. I personally have never done it, but absolutely, there's a lot of chemistry involved in that field. And then lastly, chemists can help develop brand new products and brand new things that come to the industry and things that are very helpful and useful for us. So that's just high level, some of the things that chemists do. So luckily, like I said, because chemistry is everywhere, chemists can literally work everywhere. So chemists are needed in the food and drink industry. They're needed in making cosmetics, healthcare products, shampoo, conditioner, lotions, makeup, all that stuff, a lot of chemistry. They're needed in oil and gas. So every time you fill up the gas in your car, when was the last time you hugged a chemical engineer to allow that to happen for you, right? I mean, like, these are things that chemists are helping provide to be able to fuel your cars and in our houses. Textiles, clothing, people don't think about that, but totally there are chemical materials that are going into that. Electronics, there's a lot of chemistry that goes into the iPads and the phones and everything that we use around us. Pulp, paper, agriculture, and pharmaceuticals. Okay, I see a little hand up, so I'm happy to take any questions as we go. Go ahead, go for it.
Hi, Karen here. How are you?
Good, how
I'm
are
the one
you?
who's in New Jersey via Boston via
Oh,
Minneapolis.
awesome. Yes.
So one thing, I was actually on a medical manufacturing series in the UK last week, virtually,
Mhm.
and I work across sectors. So it's interesting to think about chemistry, all in all these places. But there's a lot of discussion around sustainability and green chemicals, circular economy, all of that. And in this case, they were talking about manufacturing, but of course that affects this. So at some point, it would be great to hear that angle as well.
Yeah, and you've hit it. All major chemical companies, they are heavily focused on sustainability. And sustainability can mean different things for different industries and different people, right? When I talk to pharmaceutical formulators, when they think about sustainability, they think about the beginning to end cycle of a drug product. But within the chemical industry, we think about the raw materials that are going in to make materials, right? And then what does the end life cycle of the material look like? A very hot topic around plastics, right? Because we know those are really hard on the environment in terms of biodegradation. Doesn't happen naturally. So recycling is very important, right? And so sustainability is a huge, huge topic across the chemical industry. Any chemical manufacturer will have a whole group, a whole division, very much focused on making products sustainably and ensuring the safety of our environment as we're making those products. So that is an excellent point. Thanks for bringing that up. Okay, so let's dive into pharmaceuticals. Like I've said, this is an area I've worked in for the past 18 years. I've worked in various aspects of pharmaceuticals, but my expertise is what we call excipients. So today we're going to learn about excipients and we're going to play with excipients. Does everyone have their materials that we sent out ahead of time? Yes, everyone? You have your alginate and you have your salt. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, all right. So that comes later. I promise. This is going to be, I'm going to blow your mind today. Okay. So first, talk the talk. Let's talk like a pharmaceutical scientist. People love to ask me questions about pills. First of all, pharmaceutical scientists never, ever use the term pills. To us, they're called tablets and capsules. The reason for that is that pills are actually a very particular, although very commonly used to refer to anything, for a pharmaceutical scientist, a pill refers to a very specific type of drug delivery form. And that is something that's made by a pharmacist, where a pharmacist takes ingredients, smashes them together, rolls them up, like picture if you ever play with Play-Doh, like you roll it up into like a long chain, and then you cut those. That is a true definition of a pill. So anyone within the pharmaceutical industry does not typically talk about pills because those are not commonly manufactured. We talk about tablets and capsules. If you've ever looked at the back of your medicine, which some people do, some people have never even noticed it, I'm going to walk you through some of the important things that are in there, right? And so at the very top, what you're going to find is it says active ingredient. That is the molecule, that's the specific molecule that has a therapeutic effect in your body that is found in that formulation or in that drug product that you're taking. We call that an API, an active pharmaceutical ingredient. And as we talk, you're going to hear me say API several times. I'm referring to the active ingredient, the actual molecule that has that therapeutic effect. Okay. As you move down the box, there's some information about side effects. There's information about dosing. Dosing is very important. There's a therapeutic window that you have to hit, where if you're below that window, you're not going to have a therapeutic effect. That medicine is not going to do anything for you. And if you're above that window, you could get into lethal ranges of that medicine. And so the dosing is very, very important, and it takes a couple of years within the clinical trials to understand what is the right dosing for certain APIs. Then there's some other information about temperatures, things like that. The reason that some drug molecule or some drug products have to be kept under tight wraps in terms of humidity, in terms of temperature, it's because these APIs could potentially break down over time. So it is important to take a look at that and make sure you're following that. And then at the very, very bottom of the box is what I've spent my life working on, which is excipients. So usually you're going to see it just says inactive ingredients on the bottom, and it's going to have all these chemical names that you've never heard of. You have no idea what they do. And today I'm going to teach you what all of these products do. And the next time you look in the back of a box, you're going to start recognizing some of these molecules, and you're going to know why they're in there. Okay. Do not fret. Excipients usually have very long chemical sounding names, right? So like alpha tocopherol, you have hypromellose, you have polyvinylpyrrolidone, polymethacrylates. These they sound very scary, but at the end of the day, they're not. For example, the very first name I gave to you is vitamin E. That's just the chemical name for vitamin E. So let's not worry about being afraid of chemical names, right? Just because it's a chemical name, it doesn't mean it's not safe. As a matter of fact, pharmaceutical products take a very long time to come to market, typically around 10 to 15 years, many rounds of clinical trials that are done for safety, efficacy, and everything is always produced under what we call CGMP conditions, or good manufacturing pharmaceutical conditions, which means after every step, there's somebody who signs off. Everything is very well documented, very regulated, regimented. And so typically, pharmaceutical products are made in a very safe environment, and they are proven to be safe. Okay, I see another hand go up. Mary Rose, what can I help you with?
Yeah, what percentage of people have to be helped by the drug for it to be considered effective for the illness?
That is a really, really good question. So that gets into more of like the clinical trials. I don't know the specifics in terms of, okay, so, and I think you may have had some speakers talk about this, and this is kind of high level. When we're doing clinical trials in pharmaceuticals, phase 1 clinical trials is really only looking at the safety of the product, not the efficacy or how well it's going to work. It's safety. Once it passes that, and I would say, and I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I think it might be somewhere between 70 to 80% of drugs that actually pass that. Then you go into phase 2. Phase 2 is a longer clinical trial period because then you're actually testing for efficacy, to your point. I don't know the specific target points that have to be hit. I think it might differ by type of disease and what other products are available to help treat that disease. That probably goes into those decisions on the percentages of patients that have to show a positive effect for it to move to phase 3. Moving from phase 2 to phase 3 is super, super hard, okay? Once something moves into phase 3, then you start really honing into like the right dosing and so forth, and it's a whole other several years before you get to the end. Most people don't know this, but out of all the drugs that enter the clinical phase trial, only 1 to 2% make it to the end. Okay, so actually getting out to a commercialized product, super hard, super expensive. And that's why I feel that there's a great deal of confidence. If something actually makes it to a commercialized product, there's been a lot of testing that's done. After it's commercialized, so there's this secret phase 4 that happens where that product is still being looked at, analyzed. They're still looking at data. That's why it's really important. If you have very bad side effects, or if you find that a product is not effectively working for you, it's really important to report that back to the FDA, because the FDA is still keeping tabs on all of the products to make sure that they are being as effective as they were supposed to based on clinical trials. So I know I didn't answer your question directly because I don't know an exact percentage, but hopefully that overview kind of gives you a sense of everything that needs to happen for a drug to come out to the other end. Okay. All right. So go ahead. I heard someone pop in. Yes? No? Okay. All right. So I usually get a lot of questions on, okay, well, why are excipients even needed? Like, I don't want all this stuff. I just want the medicine that's going to make me feel better, right? You have no idea how much stuff normally goes into the medication you take. You have the active pharmaceutical ingredient, but you usually have all of these other things too that are actually very critical and important. They're important for 2 major reasons. Number 1 is processing, to be able to make that product, which I'm going to walk you through. I'm going to show you how tablets in capsules are normally made. Okay. Secondly, excipients are very important for the function and performance of the active ingredient in your body as well, believe it or not. So you can see that excipients are used to help as a filler if you have a smaller dose. Some doses are so small that it'd be impossible for you to take a miniature tablet. So you need some bulking agents to create something that's sizable enough for you to be able to ingest and take. You need lubricants to make sure that the tablets are going to pop out as they're being manufactured, which I'm going to show you, and that they can transfer to other parts of the processing as well. You need binders to create the right particle size for formulation. You need taste masking. The majority of drugs are really bitter, and without taste masking, none of us would want to take any of them. I don't know if anyone's aware, like ibuprofen in particular is terrible. There's so much sugar that has to be added, especially for kids, to take ibuprofen. Flow agents to allow all these different ingredients to mix together and to flow through the processing. Solubilization agents. What we mean by that is a lot of these therapeutic molecules are really hard for our bodies because they're so big and complex. Our bodies have a really hard time actually bringing them in. And so solubilization allows them to solubilize and actually be brought into your body, into your system for it to be effective. You need coatings. Coatings make for pretty colors for sure, but coatings actually serve to help you swallow the tablets. And rate modifying polymers, which is my expertise, which we're going to talk about as well. First of all, polymers are super long molecular chains. So I know sometimes people say, I don't know what a polymer is. I've never heard of a polymer, right? So a polymer is a super long molecule. Polymers are all over us. Okay. So plastics are made from polymers, even your body. Hair is considered a polymer. The DNA inside your body is a polymer. So polymers are everywhere. Okay. All right. So how are tablets even made? So there's 4 major processing steps to create a tablet. There's the blending, the granulation, the tableting, and the coating. So we're going to break them down a little bit. Okay. So the blending is when you take all of these materials, all of these powders, and you're going to pull them all together and you're going to blend them all uniformly before you can really create the tablets, right? Because you want to make sure that every tablet you create is going to have the same amounts of material in it, right? So the uniformity is so very important. There are 2 different types of blenders that are typically used. there's the V blender that you see right there, right? V for the shape. That you can actually see, it goes like this, and then it just goes around. So it's constantly taking two parts of the mixture, right? And it's constantly like pulling them apart and bringing them together, pulling them apart and bringing them together. And that's how it does the blending. The other type is called a double cone blender. Similarly, it also rotates, right, to allow all the ingredients to mix upon themselves. Now, the crazy thing about this is that these bad puppies are huge. Okay, so when you scale this up and you're making like huge quantities of material, this could be as large as your living room. You wouldn't believe how big these pieces of equipment are. It's so cool. And sometimes I get questions about like, well, does one blending work better than the other? They both work effectively. I like to think of it, if you play cards, the V blender is a really nice way of shuffling the cards, right? Like you separate the two cards and then you pull them together, and then you separate the two cards and then you push them and put them together, right? The double cone blender is more like you take all the cards and then like you throw them on the ground and then you mix them up and then you pull them all together. But at the end, they're both blended, right? So just slightly different ways of doing it. Next comes the granulation step. And I put a person there for size, just so you can see how big these pieces of equipment can also be. And I also like that this person is fully gowned up, because a lot of people don't realize that when you're making pharmaceutical products, there's actual uniforms that you have to wear. You have to wear hair nets. And if you have any facial hair, you have to cover it. And there's special boots. Everything is set up in what we call clean rooms. And so you can see that people tend to you have to be gowned up to be able to make these products. A granulator is when you take all of those blended solid materials and you put them in this big vat, okay? And then you see those blades that are coming down, they come into that piece of equipment, they start circulating and blending everything, and then you start adding a little bit of water to the mixture. And usually you also have to add some kind of what we call a binder, which is usually made up of a polymer as well. So it's a water and a binder that go in there. Why do we even bother granulating? What's the point of that? Anybody bake? Does anybody like to bake here on the call? Okay, awesome. All right. Have you ever tried to work with powdered sugar instead of regular sugar in a recipe? Have you ever noticed how different the flow is? If you have a canister filled with regular sugar and you pour it out, it just like very easily pours out. And powdered sugar or confectionery sugar, if you try to pour that out, it just like sticks as it's coming down. So the difference is that regular sugar is granulated. And so that flow is really important and essential to be able to make the tablets. And that's why most tablets do require some kind of granulation step to ensure that you have the right flow going into your tableting step. Okay. So this is where the magic happens. This is a tableting step. Okay. So tableting happens. This is what you're looking at is called a tablet press. And basically it's like a big circular press. And there are a bunch of these stations, we call them stations, with different die. So the shape of your tablet is usually set up by the die that's chosen to go into each station, okay? And what happens is the powder comes in and basically fills out a little station. The die comes in, pops it together and like binds it really tightly together, then opens up, and then your tablet comes out. And all of this happens while it's rotating and going around the press, okay? These bad puppies move so fast, you wouldn't believe. Depending on the size of the press, you can make anywhere between 250,000 to a little bit over 1 million tablets an hour, okay? So that is how quickly these things move. And that's why powder flow is critical, because if you're not getting flow, then you can't get the tablet press to move that quickly, okay? And then lastly comes the coating step. The coating step is the easiest one to visualize. because what you can picture is your dryer at home, your clothes dryer. So most dryers are set up, if you have a front loading dryer, right? You open and you look inside and there's a big drum inside. And that's like a tumbling drum that goes around and around. And that allows your clothes to tumble as you're putting hot air in there to dry your clothes, right? A coder is set up the same exact way. So inside of that machine, there's a drum. And what the drum does is you do a batch, right? Like you load all of your tablets in there and the drum starts to rotate and it allows the tablets to start rotating as well. The tablets don't rotate all the way with the drum, but they start rotating in an area that we call the tablet bed. So they rotate and then they kind of fall, and then they rotate and then they fall amongst themselves. And while this is happening, imagine if in the door of your dryer, you kind of put like a little spray nozzle. And that's basically what happens in a coder. You close the door and then you have these little spray nozzles that come in, and then they start spraying to coat the tablets. And as the tablets are moving around in this tablet bed, they're coating and rubbing against themselves, which allows the coating to better mix and get on top of all the tablets. And usually there are two factors you look at to make sure that your coating is done. There's a certain weight percentage that needs to be added on each tablet, and that's typically a 3% weight gain. Or you look at color uniformity, because if you haven't coated long enough, if you haven't added enough of the color and the tablets haven't really bounced amongst themselves enough, you're going to have 2 or 3 different colors in there. And so you want color uniformity as it's coming out. Okay, I see another hand go up. Yes.
What is the coating made of? Like, what are you putting on the tablets?
You betcha. So coating is also made out of polymers. The most typical coating is called HPMC or hypermellose. You can also use polyvinyl alcohol on top of coatings. So coatings are actually a very thin film that are going over the tablet. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the coating problems that can happen and why it's so important that you use a polymer, a really long molecule that coats the tablet, and it actually goes against all the curves of the tablet and provides a really nice thin film around the outside of the tablet. I'm going to show you some pictures that help to show the importance of that. Karen.
Yeah, and it actually, I forgot who just asked that question, but my question absolutely falls on top of that. So I'm a sensitive gal. I always have been since I was a kid. And I'm really sensitive to chemicals and all kinds of different things. And so, for instance, it took me 3 years to find the right vitamin D that worked with my body. And when I take one vitamin D, it makes me really sick. When I take the vitamin D that works for me, it works very well with my system and needs. And so it's interesting that you're talking about, what's the name that you call it? Those extra ingredients, the fillers and stuff?
Excipients.
Okay, that 3 times fast. Can you put that in the chat so I can
Yeah,
see it?
for sure.
So, you wonder when you talk about personalized medicine and all that stuff, like what goes into what that affect one person's chemistry and not another person. So, and that's, sometimes we have to be our own guinea pigs, right, to find out what works. But it would be great to be like in a room with all these people that manufacture vitamin D, for instance, and say, why is this pill not work for me, but this one does? So
yeah, and it comes down to a couple of things. And so this is why formulation is so important, right? So people think vitamin D is vitamin D. It should work. My guess for you is that some of the excipients are coming into play. There are excipients that go in there that help your body uptake the vitamin D, and some of the formulations that you might have had maybe didn't have that. There could be a difference in, to your point, if you're sensitive to chemicals as well, there could be something else in there that's causing a side reaction for you. Typically, excipients tend to be very safe. Excipients tend to actually go into food products in much, much large quantities than they do in pharmaceuticals. The majority of excipients were taken from the food industry because we know that they are, safe to ingest because food producers are using them, right? But for sure, there are people that have sensitivities to specific excipients. And so as you start experimenting, it might be worthwhile for you to check that inactive ingredient box that we talked about early and start to see if there's a correlation between particular excipients that you might, have a particular side effect to. That makes sense? Okay, so there's the word. The word is excipient. It's right on top of my next slide, so I didn't type it in the chat. But okay, so as I mentioned, excipients are really important for two things: for processing, to be able to make the tablets, and for performance. So in terms of processing, you can see in the bottom, I added some very typical excipients that you might see in the backside of your box, right? So fillers like lactose, mannitol, cellulose, sugars, those are very, very commonly used as fillers. There are glidants. Glidants are needed to make sure that everything is moving well while you're blending, because you don't want things to clump, or else you will not have uniform tablets coming out at the other end. A starch, talc, magnesium silicate, those are very typically used as glidants. For granulation, like I talked about, it's not enough just to add water into your granulation step. You need to add a binder to make sure that everything is really going to bind together and form those nice flowing granules that you need. So typically as a binder, HPMC or HPC, those two are very commonly used. HPMC can also be named hypromellose. You'll see that in the back of the box as well. PVP, which is that polyvinyl pyrrolidone name that I said very early on when we started. MCC, which is microcrystalline cellulose, and starch. Those are very common binders. In tableting, as I talked about, because those tablet presses are just spinning around and moving so quickly, there's a good chance you can have sticking and things that happen if you don't have a really good lubricant in your formulation. And some of the very commonly used lubricants that you see here are magnesium stearate, sodium stearofumarate, and wax. You also see it named as carnauba wax or beeswax, or there's a lot of different types of waxes that can be used that help for lubrication in the tableting step. Okay.
Paula, I had
Yes.
noticed there was also another question from Chioma
Oh,
that
I didn't see
actually was
that come
wondering
up.
as well.
Sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. Must every tablet go through the coating? And I was wondering the same thing.
That's a good question. So coatings are important for various reasons. I believe it is estimated that close to 90% of tablets that are sold have some type of coating on them. Even if the tablet you take is white and you don't see a color, there's probably a clear coating on them. The coating is important because it does provide some protection from humidity in the air. Coating is important in terms of the different colors because it helps whenever, say you have a particular drug that you're making, you could have a 30 milligram dose, a 60 milligram dose, 120 milligram dose. You never want to get those confused. So if they all look like white tablets, it would be easy for you to make a mistake. And so sometimes colorants are added, so you know when you're making the yellow one, that's the 30, the blue is the 60 or whatnot, right? And so that's why colors are usually added. And they're very important to help you when you're swallowing a tablet. If you swallow a tablet that does not have this clear film, it's really hard for it to actually go down your esophagus. The clear film allows, upon wetting, as soon as you put it in your mouth and it hits your saliva, just that little bit of saliva allows those molecules to start kind of undoing themselves and creating that lubrication that you need to make it easier for you to swallow a tablet, especially if it's a large tablet. All large tablets are going to have some kind of coating on them. Does that answer your question? All right, cool. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the importance of excipients in drug performance. Do I have any ramen noodle fans out there? Ramen noodles, yes, ramen noodles. Okay, so ramen noodles are a really, really good way to visualize how some of these excipients and some of these polymers work to help with drug performance. Okay, so we call these rate modifying polymers, and the ones that I typically work with are the ones listed here: hypromellose, which again can be also called hydroxypropylmethylcellulose, which is a really long name. So typically you're going to see it called hypromellose, ethyl cellulose, polyethylene oxide, alginate. Those are the products that we tend to call controlled release excipients. The reason they're called controlled release excipients is that they're usually formulated with the active ingredients. So in this drawing, imagine all those red dots are the molecules of that active ingredient, that API that we talked about. Okay, so that's the active ingredient. When you formulate it into what we call a matrix, you create this mesh between the rate modifying polymer and the API, okay? And it creates a nice compact, and there you have your tablet. What happens is when you ingest that tablet and it hits your stomach and all the acids and liquids that are in your stomach, that tablet starts to expand, just like your ramen noodle does whenever you throw it in the water, right? And it starts warming up. That ramen noodle block of noodles that you had starts expanding, right? And so you can picture it similarly. It starts expanding, and all those really long molecular chains that you can see on the bottom part of the picture, right? They start pulling apart. And as they start pulling apart, it starts to allow the release of the API from the matrix in a very controlled form. So without that polymer, if you were just taking a tablet that was basically just made up of the API plus binders and things like that, we call those immediate release products, which is typically, like Tylenol, ibuprofen, something you take when you have a headache or whatnot. Those are only good in your body for like 6 hours. Whenever you formulate something with these intricate excipient matrices, it allows that drug to basically come out in your body over a period of 12 to 24 hours. And that's why we call them controlled release. So a lot of products that you only take once a day typically have a rate modifying polymer in them. And that's what's controlling the release in your body. So as the polymers are expanding and all these long chains are moving away from each other, and the API is releasing and then being uptaken in your body, that's what allows it to happen over a long period of time. Okay. All right. So excipients are really important just for the performance of the drug themselves too, right? So without that, you would have to take more medications, more tablets over a 24-hour period, and maybe you wouldn't even have the same effectiveness, because when you do that, you have spikes that happen in your blood of that API being released. Whereas with these types of releases, we ensure that we stay within the therapeutic window for a very long period of time. So every formulation is very different. Every API is very different. That's why it takes years to develop the right formulations to get you in that right therapeutic window the longest amount of time for these types of products. Okay, so I'm going to go back to tablet coatings again. I think I kind of answered this question, but excipients are really important for tablet coatings. And tablet coatings tend to be seen as kind of like the easiest step in the process, but things can also go terribly wrong in tablet coatings. And these are some of the examples of what happens. So if the tablet coating is too wet, upon getting put on the outer surface of the tablets, you can have what's called twinning, where tablets start to stick with themselves. So you don't want that. That's bad. On the bottom there, those white tablets, you see how they have like a rough surface to them? We call that orange peeling. And that could be a combination of humidity and temperatures that are used in the tablet coating process. In the middle, I have an example, and it might be harder to see on the computer, but that's not uniform colors. So you have some tablets that are more in the orange, and then some tablets that are more in the red spectrum. So that is a tableting process that was not completed. And on the right side, those are very common things that we see in tablet coatings as well, either like chipping or peeling or breaking apart, or on the bottom, when we talked about that tableting step, when the tablets come off the tablet press, they do need a few hours to kind of fully equilibrate with the outside environment. And if you take a tablet too quickly and you put it into the coating, what happens is you get that film coating on it. And then when the tablet slightly expands to equilibrate, then you get that crack that happens right in the middle. And so I put this in here because I think, doing a high level overview of how tablets are made, I don't want to oversimplify things, right? Every step has a whole lot of chemistry and math, and there's a lot of analyzing and experimentation, and there's a lot that needs to happen to ensure that everything works as expected in each of these steps. Okay, now we're getting to the fun part. What about capsules? Do capsules have excipients? You bet they do. Excipients are everywhere. So with a hard capsule, normally hard capsules are made from gelatin. But as more and more people are moving away from gelatin-based materials or due to dietary issues and so forth, we need to find a plant-based solution. And that's what Hypermellose is, that HPMC product I keep talking about. That is a cellulosic. It comes from trees. And so that's a plant-based product that can be used to make a hard capsule. Inside the capsules, if you ever break apart a capsule, a lot of times you find like these little spheres in there. Those spheres are called multiparticulates. And I know they just look like simple, little balls in there, but they're actually quite complex. Inside of each of these is a sugar sphere. And then they are layers on top of those sugar spheres of different components, including the API layer, right? You need the active ingredient. And then usually on top of that, there's a rate modifying coating that's usually made up of ethyl cellulose that again controls the release of the API coming off of that little tiny sugar sphere ball that you see inside those capsules. So very complex technology that goes into capsules. And then even soft gels. Soft gels are made from alginates. And that's typically, I get this question a lot, like, how do you fill a little gel cap with, everything that needs to go in it? The answer is the filler and the gel cap are made at the same time. And so if you can see at the bottom there on the right-hand side, you can see an example of how you're putting in that blue liquid is what the filling is of what you want to put in the gel cap. And so you have a single drop come down into a machine that's making the soft gel capsules as it's going. So it's normally called a form, fill, seal process because everything's happening at the same time. You're forming the capsule, you're filling it, and then you're sealing it all in one step. So it's quite complex, okay? But like I said, these soft gels are made from this thing called alginate. And all of you should have a bottle of alginate in front of you. So today, what I'm going to show you is we are basically going to do a cross polymerization where together we're going to create the polymer that makes that outer surface of soft gel capsules. Okay, so there's a very real application for the chemistry that we're going to do together. Okay. All right, so let's make some polymer worms. All right, so the first thing we need is about a cup of water, okay? And then you need to take out your calcium chloride that came in the little Ziploc bag, okay? So then I need you to take in your little Ziploc bag, I think I put about 2 to 3 tablespoons. It's not an exact science on this, but basically you need to put that calcium chloride in a cup of water. Let me put down so you can see what I'm doing here. Okay, in the cup of water. And then I just want you to mix it and get it really, really well mixed in there. Okay. Now, you have to use the calcium chloride. The calcium is the magic sauce in what we're doing today. Calcium chloride is salt, especially for those of you living in Michigan or colder weathers. Calcium chloride is the salt that's typically what you buy at Home Depot and other places to help with ice, right? So that's a very typical product. If you use table salt, which is sodium chloride, the sodium cannot make the same magic as calcium because sodium only requires one molecular bond where calcium requires two. And that's the magic of what we're going to do. So you got to use the calcium chloride and get it stirred in there and get it nice and stirred. Okay. All right. Give me a hands up or some kind of emoticon. Let me know when you're ready, when your calcium chloride solution is ready before I move to the next step, since I can't see most of you guys. Just want to make sure we're all aligned. Let's see here. Are we all in the same step? Does everyone have their calcium chloride solution ready to go? Yes, kind of, sort of, no? Okay, all right. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna add, so in your kit, you also received this little guy. And what is in here is called alginate. Alginate is another very commonly used excipient. It's a natural product that's extracted from seaweed, okay? Alginate in itself is a pretty long molecule. So I would consider alginate already a polymer chain, okay? What's gonna happen here is as soon as we put this liquid into this liquid, the calcium that's found in our solution is going to cross-link with the alginate polymers that we have in this solution. And the reaction that happens is pretty immediate. And what it does is the calcium is able to grab one polymer chain link here, another polymer here, another polymer link here, another polymer chain here. And so very quickly, it creates a very fast polymerization and you make this product that, like I said, can be used to make gel caps, okay? So let me make sure I've got the camera set up here, right? Okay, so all you have to do is squeeze in there, give it a nice little squeeze, okay? And then you just reach in there. I know it looks transparent, you can't see it, but legit, you make a polymer. And this is, like I said, the same exact chemistry that's happening to make soft gels. I don't know if folks are familiar with, heartburn, which is a very common condition as well. There is a very popular over-the-counter product that uses alginate as the active ingredient. And how that works is, for those of you that don't know what heartburn is whenever you have acid buildup in your stomach that starts to creep back up your esophagus and it creates like this burning sensation. And that's why, we call it heartburn. Your heart isn't really burning, it just feels like it because of that acid creeping up. And there are a lot of different ways that you can treat that, right? You can do an acid-base neutralization to help with that. But another way that the other thing you can do is you can use alginates. So there are alginate products in the marketplace where the alginate is put into a tablet with calcium, with another product with calcium in the tablet. And as soon as it hits your stomach, it forms this hard polymer-like, or not polymer-like, but real cross-linked polymer chain. And it forms it over the top of your stomach. And in this particular area, we tend to call that a raft. And that raft formation stays on top of your stomach and it does not allow the acid to go back up your esophagus. So that's another way that, this fun polymer that you're playing with has a very real world application. It can really help people that have heartburn conditions and so forth because of that raft formation that happens because of this very same cross polymerization process that we're doing here, right in front of us. So that's the skinny. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, Paula.
Yes.
It's Melanie. I'm curious. Are you able to share like what medicines might have that? So next time I go to the drugstore, I can look on the shelf and then I would have the picture of what we've just done.
Yeah. So like I said, typical soft gel capsules, different manufacturers, the majority of them still using gelatin, but this is kind of a new up and coming technology to move to plant-based, right? And then Gaviscon. Gaviscon is the over-the-counter product that uses alginates in particular to create that raft on top of your stomach. To allow or to stop, to prevent the acid from moving back up.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Paula, I had noticed that I think Mary Rose had asked earlier, and I was wondering the same thing.
Yeah.
What does it take? What do you have to do to become a pharmacist tech or a pharmacist?
So I personally, I don't have a pharmacy degree, but there are a lot of fields that you can go into, right? Like I said, like I went into chemical engineering, mostly because I come from a family of engineers, to be honest. So I grew up in an environment where I knew engineers were solving cool problems, and I knew that was something I wanted to do. But I always wanted to work in the pharmaceutical field, right? And so if you wanted to take that route, similar to mine, well, you're working on either processing up scale or the scale up, right? As we talked about, these large processes that happen, or even helping with some of this technology, some of these, polymers and so forth. A chemical engineering degree is typically 4 years. Master's would be another 2 years. And if you wanted to pursue a PhD, that would be an additional 5 to 7, depending on the project that you get involved in. For a pharmacist in particular, I do believe a PhD would be almost a requirement if you wanted to be a pharmacist, to the point where you're actually working in a pharmaceutical company and creating these products. And so similarly, you would have to do an undergrad degree, and then you could actually just skip over and do your PhD without that master's in the middle. So it'd be 4 years of an undergrad, probably chemistry, biochemistry, something related like that. And then that PhD, that's another 5 to 7 years. To be a pharmacist tech, I think you probably only need an undergrad degree, like the 4 years, and maybe a master's as well. I don't think you need a PhD to work as a pharmacist tech. All right, I'm going to stop sharing because those are all the slides I had. And it's just easier for me to see everybody. And now I can actually access the chat. I was having trouble seeing the chat before. Okay, all right, cool. Any other questions? Don't be shy.
So, hey,
I'm happy to.
Well, this is Leanne, and I just put this in the chat. But maybe you can say the difference between somebody who's a pharmacist and somebody who works in pharmacy, because I think that's like a common mix-up in people's heads. I know it was for me early on.
Yeah, but honestly, a lot of the folks that I work with were originally, they went to pharmacy school thinking that they wanted to work as a pharmacist, like the Walgreens, CVS pharmacist that you normally see. And then upon graduation, they decided to take another route and do the industry route and actually work for a pharmaceutical company producing these products. And so, the journey to get there, the route to get there is not like specific. There's not only just one way to get there. So it's all very much based on your interests. Do you want to work as a pharmacist? Then go down the pharmacy route, but even with that pharmacy degree, for sure, you could work at Merck, Pfizer, J&J. Pharmacists can definitely work in industry and help develop these actual formulations to be effective.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So if nobody else has a question, I have another one that maybe you can explain.
Sure.
What's the difference between a pill made by, say, Pfizer with a brand name versus a generic? Is it always just as good to take a generic?
So I think the textbook answer is yes, but my experience is no. So generics undergo a slightly different process for approval. And there are a few different ways that a generic can come to the marketplace. Generics normally have to wait for a drug to be past its patent to be able to actually produce that product as a generic. So that's one pathway. Those generics tend to be an exact copy of what we call the innovator. Like, so to your point, like J&J, Pfizer, Merck, we consider those innovator companies. And then Teva, Sun Pharma, all of those are generic companies. So what they do is they take that exact formulation, because it's off patent, they can use it, and then they go to market with that formulation. That to me is more of a like to like. If a generic took the same exact formulation and started producing it as a generic product, patent hits expiration, a generic company can work with that same API and they can find another formulation to get to the same drug release as the innovator. And that's where I think things can get a little messy. So I'll give you an example. There is an ADHD drug, methylphenidate, that was produced originally. It was an Alza product. J&J bought Alza, and it uses a very specific technology called osmotic pumps, and that's something that we work with. That uses polyethylene oxide, which is one of my products. An osmotic pump is like super innovative, super cool technology, where the tablet itself is actually 2 layers. In one layer, you have the API, the active ingredient, and then in the bottom layer, you have a really fast and it's like a very it's a polymer that tends to blow up a lot faster than other polymers. So it's a very fast swelling, but it's not just the speed, but also how much it swells, and that's polyethylene oxide. And what you do is you put a coating on it, and then you drill a hole at the very top. And so what happens is when you ingest it and you have liquid come into that system, that polymer starts to swell really fast. And then that API comes out of that little hole that's on top of the tablet. Okay, so like I said, like really neat technology and like really sophisticated. And it comes like at a very specific rate. Okay. Generics came out with a very similar product. The active ingredient is exactly the same, but what they do is they formulate it into a matrix tablet, which is the example that we talked about today, where they just put it in with another polymer, and then you ingest the polymer, and the polymer swells, and then the drug releases. On paper, it looks like the release rates are similar, but what we've seen over and over again is that patients say that formulation doesn't last as long as the osmotic pump. And as you can imagine, the osmotic pump is very defined. And actually, you can get to 24 hours a lot closer with an osmotic pump than you can with a matrix. And so that's an example of a generic that, because they say generics are just like the innovator, blah, 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 it should be the same. It's really not. And then Karen, that goes to an example that is like what you were saying, right? We've seen patients, we've talked to patients, we know that there are patients where that generic product, because it's formulated with different excipients and it's not, at the same efficacy rate as the innovator product, they know it acts differently in their body, right? And so, and I know it's really hard for the common person to know. I can pick up the back, and I know whether the formulation is the same or not. And then I can feel confident buying a generic product, knowing that this is just like the innovator. I just looked in the back, right? it's a lot harder for someone else to be able to know who's using what technology, right? So overall, the answer is, in theory, they should be the same, but over and over, we see examples where the generic product is not exactly like the innovator product.
Well, that was fantastic. I don't know if we have any more questions, but if anybody does, they can always give us an email or anything to see if they need any questions answered. But thank you so much, Paula, for coming on and doing this wonderful experiment with us. That worm was so cool. And I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye,
Bye.
everybody. Have a great weekend.